Hi everyone, Sandman here. Today's video was brought to you by a donation from Dio Proximo, and here's what he has to say. Hello Sandman, there's been something on my mind for quite a long time now. A video by Skeptor called Institutionalized Sociopathy has made me decide to give you this topic. I read a book about psychopaths and studied this subject for a while now, and I want everyone to go to Amazon and buy a book about psychopaths and learn about this subject. If you look at the psychopathy checklist by Dr. Hare and become familiar with its features, you can apply these traits to people such as politicians, bankers, and even cult leaders, and then you really start to understand why the world is the way that it is. I've been comparing the traits of psychopaths to feminists and women who've displayed really bad behavior. The bad behavior women has been talked about on a lot of MGTOW channels, and the traits described there really match up to the psychopathic traits. Feminists are the absolute dregs of female nature. They are the worst of the worst when it comes to female nature, and that has been also described countless times on anti-feminist and MGTOW channels. But feminism is much more than that. It's female psychopathy. And the first major psychopathic trait is superficial charm, and I think there's plenty of that with so many women these days. Everything is surface level with them. Another one is grandiose self-worth, which is also called narcissism, and there's plenty of that in women as well. I've also heard a lot of women, particularly feminists, who call themselves goddesses, while denigrating men as being subhuman. And the next trait is pathological lying. This is a big one in feminism and a lot of women in general. And a lot of feminists are relentless liars. They keep pushing the 1 in 5 myth of the wage gap, even though it's been debunked so many times. Anita Sarkeesian's comments about dying light is undeniable proof that she's a liar, and Brianna Wu was caught red-handed false flagging herself with her game on Steam. All the death threats that they have claimed to receive are mostly fake, and feminists typically believe it's okay to make false rape accusations, and they like to use it as a weapon. They even think that there's nothing wrong with Rolling Stone's rape hoax, and that people should even continue to believe it, because women are always right. Psychopaths also use cunning and manipulation. This applies to feminists, who get lots of donations, and a lot of other women who manipulate men. They also have a lack of remorse or guilt. Feminists also have no problem with men who've had their lives destroyed by false allegations and accusations, and even spent many years in prison. They also have a lack of emotion or emotional poverty. There's plenty of feminists and women who've displayed these types of traits towards their exes. Remember how Big Red was singing Cry Me a River when the man in that video was talking about male suicide? She had no emotion whatsoever. Or how about the part where she talked about bathing in male tears? These women are just cold, they lack empathy, and not showing emotions towards anyone else. Feminists could also care less about women in the third world, as an example. The parasitic lifestyle on their part is also a really big one, particularly with gold-digging women. These women don't contribute anything to society or generate wealth, and they solely live on the hard labor of others. Then there's promiscuous sexual behavior. There were controls against this in past societies for a good reason, because women who slept around to get what they want can no longer stay in a relationship for the long term and should be avoided at all costs. And the failure to accept responsibility for one's own action is another one of their qualities. That's another big one with feminists right there. Feminists do not know what responsibility to take for their actions, if any, nor it seems to a lot of women out there in general. It always seems to be the men's fault and women can never do anything wrong. And finally, there are feminists and women who try to get into many short-term marital relationships and marriages in order to simply have a get-rich-quick scheme for psychopathic women. And I've seen a lot of that in the way that men get screwed over by the courts. I'm not saying that every feminist out there is a psychopath, and I'm not qualified in any way to diagnose people, but a lot of them are showing these traits. Well, Dio Proximo, thanks for your comments as well as bringing this issue to my attention, that feminists tend to exhibit psychopathic behavior. You also sent me a website with a checklist for female psychopathy, and I'll put it in the description below so that everyone else can check it out for themselves. But while I believe that there are many feminists that are psychopaths, I think that the proper label would be sociopaths. Sociopaths exhibit psychopathic behavior, but are self-aware enough to know when they need to tone down their behavior as well. And the major difference between the two is that psychopaths can't control their behavior, but sociopaths are very different if you study psychology. And I'm including yet another link in the description below that shows us the differences between sociopaths and psychopaths. Dio Proximo, while your observations are correct, I want to illustrate the difference between the female psychopath and the female sociopath. To become a politician, banker, or public figure in our society, The majority of people actually have to have natural charm, be manipulative, lie continuously, as well as be remorseless, and lack empathy for their victims, as well as deflecting blame and having chameleon-like qualities to hide their true nature. And I've met many politicians in person, and to be a politician, lying is part of the game, and so is charm, as well as deflecting blame. Psychopaths, on the other hand, use superficial charms to lure their victims in, instead of actual charms. A psychopath might use her body to attract someone instead of her words. They are also extremely self-centered, easily bored, are incredibly deceptive, and show little remorse, and often live off of other people, and are often sexually promiscuous, and deflect blame on others, but most importantly have a very unrealistic view of themselves and the world. They see themselves as the grand poobah, or the king of the world. And if you look at sociopaths, they appear to be people that are psychopath-light. The difference between the two is that sociopaths blend into their environment, yet psychopaths do not. The prison system is filled with psychopaths that can't blend into society, and steal or hurt others, and can't get away with it. But our society is filled with sociopaths that actually figured out how to hide their theft, and steal in ways that blend into the background. A wife that intentionally divorces her husband for $1 million is not considered a thief. But a guy that robs a bank for $1 million is a criminal and sent off to jail. The female sociopath knows that she'll get away with the crime, and it will be socially accepted and even encouraged. Yet the male bank-robbing psychopath only hopes to get away with the crime, and he doesn't know if he's going to get away with it for sure. He hasn't thought about the long-term consequences of his actions in most cases. And the psychopath typically takes excessive risks, while the sociopath does not. Anita Sarkeesian didn't take the risk of getting shot at Utah State University to do her talk. Instead, she was just showing sociopathic tendencies instead of psychopathic ones. And according to the second article in the description below, a sociopath commits premeditated crimes with controllable risks, criminal opportunism, fraud, and their key word is calculated. Another big difference between the psychopath and the sociopath is the sociopath is able to commit to superficially normal relationships. They may be less normal under the surface, but as far as any random onlooker would be concerned, they're normal. And they could be considered a social predator, whereas the psychopath is not. Women are narcissistic, but there's a difference between being narcissistic and extremely self-centered at the cost of your friendships and your relationships. I've met the female psychopath in my own life. She doesn't typically have many friends because she's too self-centered. But with regards to narcissism, we all have some of it in ourselves because we need it to have a healthy ego. It's when narcissism gets out of control that things go bad. And the feminists that say that all men should be killed except for a small group for breeding purposes are indeed psychopaths. But the majority of them are not. Even if they believe us men to be subhuman, they'll never say it in public, or risk being discovered for who they truly are. The reason the prison system is not filled with women is because women steal in socially acceptable or invisible ways. Feminists need to promote the narrative of women as victims, because this helps create the perfect cover story for their theft. A victim is a victim after all, and she can't possibly be held responsible for her own actions, even if those actions involve the theft of another person's livelihood, or life savings, or the destruction of that said person. With regards to Big Red, I would certainly agree with you that she shows psychopathic tendencies. She doesn't appear to have the willpower to control herself and what she says and does. She embarrassed the feminists that took part in that rally with her. She was definitely a psychopath, and you also have to notice that you've never seen her anywhere else outside of that video since she attacked the men's rights movement. The sociopathic feminists saw her as an impulsive psychopath that couldn't be controlled, and because of that they probably cut her out of the group. It's important for feminism to maintain plausible deniability at all times, and the same goes for women in general. They always seem to need an out when they're questioned, and if you call them out on their bad behavior, they always have one or two excuses made up for what they're doing. The most guilt a woman ever admitted to me was when she smiled and laughed like a 5-year-old kid when I called her out on it. Most women typically hate taking accountability for their actions, and they do everything they can to deflect the blame, even before the blame comes. They're like social chess players, and they see the board laid out in front of them, and they have countermoves prepared for people that they interact with. A psychopath, on the other hand, can't cope with the behavior of others. One of my friends has a sister, and she's an absolute psychopath. I told him to record the awful conversations that he had with her, and then when she called him out to be a liar, to play those words back to her. So he did this, and she flipped out and tried to destroy his phone. But she also became aware that every time she was speaking to him, he was recording their conversations. A sociopath would adapt to the new circumstances and police her words and use double meanings and change her communication style as well as habits to match this new situation. But she couldn't really deal with it until she stopped talking to him completely and stormed out of the room like a 5-year-old child, and she's done this every single time he's talked to her. She's a psychopath. She can't keep any female friends either because she uses them and takes advantage of them. The female sociopath, on the other hand, gets together with her female friends for ladies' night, and they discuss ways to control their male partners together. They can keep their female friends because they recognize the benefits of keeping those mutually beneficial relationships going for as long as possible. But at the same time, they scheme together with other women in order to control men. And that's what feminism is all about. Sociopathic women scheming together about how to take men's rights away, as well as their freedoms. In the past, Western governments seem to have kept men distracted by the evil communist empire, but at the same time the Trojan horse of feminism entered into Western society while people were busy watching the Russians. For most of history, men were gentlemen about war. Armies would march onto the battlefield at a set time and do their business. And it wasn't really until the late 19th and early 20th century that major European armies started fighting most major wars and offensives with sneak attacks and dirty tricks. Wars these days are held the way that women would wage them, and not necessarily the way that men would. And the male politicians wage war these days instead of kings and nobles in the past. And politicians have to be sociopathic to compete and become politicians in the first place. Male politicians are like men with the cunning and manipulation techniques that many women naturally employ. And so are the banking as well as political elites. It seems that men have learned how to think and act like women. I would suspect that in some ways they have. Anyways, Dio Proximo, please realize that what you're describing in your comments to me is not female psychopathy. Instead, it's female sociopathy. Hopefully that clears things up and gives you some new things to think about. That's all I've got to say for today. As for everyone else, please follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook to get tomorrow's video today. Thanks for taking your daily dose of red pills. So enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers.